Right? So in the resurrection, Christ's humanity is still physical. Right? Thomas puts his fingers in the side where he was pierced. It's still the same body, still the same Hebrew body. He didn't change genders or lose his ethnicity. No, he's still the same Jesus, but his body takes on a different status in terms of what it's capable of doing. Right? He appears out of nowhere. He's able to eat still. He transcends space and time. And as John says in his epistle, when we see him, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he truly is. So our bodies will be conformed to his glorious body, as Paul says, and it will be made spiritual. Right? So, and a lot of Gnostics mistake this to mean, in the resurrection, your body is not physical anymore. It's, quote, spiritual. No, there's no dichotomy between spirit and physical. Right? That's a Gnostic assumption, and we do not teach that. That is absolutely rejected as heresy in Orthodoxy. It's not physicality, it's the mode of being. It's the way our physicality exists in reality that changes. Right? So spirit and matter, spirit will be unified and will raise matter in some new way to a new way of being that we do not conceive, but that will be like Christ's resurrected body. So this is very important because this refutes a whole host of heresies. In fact, Roman Catholicism even, this is almost like forgotten in their theology of the resurrection. Right? I mean, when you ask Roman Catholics about heaven and all this, they talk about the beatific vision. Oh, you go to heaven and you stare into the essence of God and you're satiated. Your intellect is satiated because you see the essence of God. I mean, come on. That's not what the Bible talks about the final state being. It's the resurrection into bodies. You're going to be resurrected in the same body you have now. And by the way, this just proves Calvinism and Augustinianism. Why are all people resurrected? If Jesus only died to save the elect, so-called. Now we believe, of course, that ultimately it is only efficacious in the fullest theosis sense for those who were foreknown. I'm asking a different question about the restoration of man's nature. Why are all men resurrected? Jesus says all men are resurrected, right, in John, so we know they are. Paul says all are resurrected to the same degree that Adam brought all to fall and death. And that's because Christ assumed universal human nature. This is an aspect and a part of the doctrine of recapitulation that is fundamental to Orthodox theology and nowhere in Latin and Protestant theology. This is a fundamental distinction and difference. This is another reason why you can't blend these two churches. They can only be blended. They can only be reunified when the West rejects its stupid Nestorian doctrine of the resurrection, where Jesus only resurrects the elect. No, Jesus resurrects all men because all of human nature is restored in the resurrection. That doesn't mean that all men are saved. It means that all men's nature is restored, and that's the basis. That's the only possible basis for why all men are resurrected. There's no other basis for being resurrected. By the way, this right here, if you understand what I'm talking about, this puts an end to Catholic theology for you. Like, you can't be Catholic anymore because they don't even talk about this. And this is fundamental to Orthodox theology and all the Orthodox fathers. All right, Christ assuming universal human nature and raising all men thereby. Now, granted, yes, the Roman Catholic Church was like, yeah, well, all men are going, there will be a resurrection. I'm not saying they don't teach a resurrection. I know that. But what they teach is that the resurrection is specifically efficacious for the salvation of the predestined in the Augustinian sense, in the Thomistic sense, and that therefore Jesus died to save the elect. Now, the problem is that this stress that they put on that eventually meant that the grace of God is limited to the institutional church and baptism. So you get that very strong Roman Catholic no salvation outside the church doctrine because of the Augustinian acceptance of baptism as the only means by which you can be connected to Christ. Right? So there's no longer a fundamental aspect to human nature itself, which already links a man to Christ, which is what we would say, which is why Paul says, the word is near you, even in your heart, to Greeks who haven't been baptized, right? Pagans. Jesus, as John 1 says, who lights every man who comes into the world. How is that? That's not possible on this theology. On this theology, you have only a natural state of being until you are baptized, right? And this is why Augustine had to eventually admit unbaptized infants are damned. Now, no Orthodox theologian, no Orthodoxy has never taught that. We don't teach that. And this is one of the easiest ways to see these two theologies are distinct. Now, the later medieval Rome, and this was held in the West up until the 800s or 900s, and then it starts to be softened with the introduction of the limbus patrum. Well, we're not going to throw the unbaptized infants all the way into, the lake of fire. We're going to put them kind of up towards the balcony of the lake of fire, where it's kind of hot up there, but maybe sweaty little babies, but they're not, literally cooking. We're not going to cook the babies. We're just going to make them sweat. So this is just ridiculous. I mean, no wonder people would be like, what? I mean, this makes no sense, right? So this is also why they don't understand the descent of Christ. And as the New Testament very clearly says, Jesus preached the gospel to the dead in Hades, which shows us a revolution again in theology between East and West. God is solicitous for man's salvation. He's not eager as a Talmudic bean counter to toss infants into a lake of fire. And no wonder people adopted atheism given this ridiculous Augustinian theology. And I'm a dude who was like mega Augustinian, okay? My 20s was dominated by reading most of this dude's works. I'm talking thousands and thousands of pages. I took his name when I became Roman Catholic. So it was very, very difficult for me to eventually admit serious criticism of my hero. But I had to be honest and do it. And I had to be honest and do it because I delved even deeper into the Eastern Fathers. And I started realizing these guys have a really serious correction for the extremities in Augustine's theology. And let's be honest here. We all know Augustine's theology absolutely gave rise to Luther and Calvin. Of course it did. Everybody knows that. And Jansenism. Yeah, duh. We all know that. Right, so we can't soften that aspect of man's soteriology and anthropology, right? Now, I'm not saying Augustine was a Calvinist. No. I mean, they took him to like another extreme. But all of the clay is already present within Augustine to mold it into Lutheranism and Calvinism. But again, we see that the only basis for all men being resurrected is not some random fiat, not some random thought of God, but an actual metaphysical connection to the fact that Jesus assumed human nature. And what that did was it renovated all of human nature. Now, to explain specifically how it is that isn't universalism, we go into the questions of how the mode of man's willing is what determines his experience of the afterlife. For a wide audience, the easiest way to explain this is the C.S. Lewis book, The Great Divorce. And this is kind of a parody of The Great Marriage. I forget who wrote Great Marriage, but somebody who was trying to like argue some kind of weird form of universalism. And C.S. Lewis's point, even though he wasn't Orthodox, he was essentially making the Orthodox point on this, which is that, look, you can't force people's wills into liking something, right? This is a fundamental aspect to free will. And we do retain free will after the resurrection. That's another thing that people don't realize. They don't think about that. And so, since that's the case, in the resurrection, all men's natures will be restored, but what they do with that nature through the mode of their willing, right, to prefer vice or to prefer virtue, to prefer evil or to prefer the good, that will determine their experience of the afterlife. So, for example, for us, there is damnation. There is you having a very real choice to reject God. But the experience of the afterlife is not a giant pit of literal lava, okay, that is opening up in some cavern somewhere. It's not about location, okay. So, and I'm not saying there's no hell or that, right? I mean, if you're talking about where is hell, it's if you hate God, it's everywhere, right? In other words, hell already begins for you in this life. The miserable atheists, the miserable Satanists, and so forth. Now, they're not all miserable, but they eventually will be. Many of them are. I'm just saying that for many people, hell begins in this life, just as much as deification and theosis begins in this life. And so when you die, you just simply go on into continuing to experience that in the spiritual sense. And so in the resurrection, if you've chosen death over life, as God says in the law, I set before you life and death. Choose which one you will serve this day. Those that choose death and life, guess what? That river of fire, right? The river of fire is the water of life. The same energies that radiate and emanate from the divine glory that the righteous love and seek after in this life and the next, it's that same divine energy and power that torments those that hate him. And when you understand the Orthodox doctrine of Hades and the descent of Christ into Hades to preach the gospel, by the way, which why would he do that if God was the Talmudic bean counter, ready to damn and cook the babies? Doesn't make any sense. It's stupid. He wouldn't have become incarnate and died if he's this malicious Talmudic bean counter. That's crazy. Crazy talk. He's not paying himself an infinite debt, Anselm. He, from the very beginning, intended on raising man, deifying man. Man rebelled, and he even still forgave man. So that's the kind of God we're talking about. Does that kind of God want to damn non-elect infants because they didn't make it to a baptismal font in time? That's crazy. No. Only a rigorous legalist who hasn't experienced divine love would see God that way.